the sun dipped low behind the dusty mesas, painting the sky in streaks of blood red and gold. The small town of Dry Creek settled into its evening hush, the kind that whispered secrets through the wind and stirred the dust on empty streets. A few stray dogs padded through the shadows, and the last of the horses neighed softly in their corrals. In the center of town, just beyond the weather-beaten saloon, a crowd had gathered outside the chief's adobe house. The air was thick with tension and whispered fears. The chief's daughter, a young woman named Leela, lay inside, her body trapped in silence and stillness since the accident that shattered her spine weeks ago. Her once lively eyes now stared blankly, the spark of her spirit dimmed beneath the weight of her paralysis. No one in Dry Creek wanted to talk about it openly, but every soul there carried the same unspoken truth. Lila's condition was a curse, a bad omen, and the town's fate was somehow tangled in her fragile state. The men had shaken their heads and refused to help, saying the risk wasn't worth it. The women looked away, afraid to meet the chief's gaze. Even the town doctor, a grizzled man with more scars than smiles, had admitted there was little he could do. Outside, the chief stood tall, his broad shoulders hunched beneath a heavy burden. His weathered face was etched with lines that told stories of battles fought and lost not on a battlefield, but against the creeping despair that now gripped his family. He clenched his fists, his voice barely above a whisper, as he pleaded, "Someone, anyone please, my daughter deserves a chance." But the crowd remained silent. Fear had taken root in their hearts, stronger than any hope. It was said that no healer in these parts could mend such a wound, and worse yet, the journey to the nearest town with proper care was perilous through rough mountains, hostile land, and unforgiving weather. No one dared volunteer. From the edge of the crowd, where shadows grew longer and the wind kicked up the dust, a lone figure appeared. A man, tall and lean, dressed in worn denim and a weathered hat pulled low over his eyes. His boots stirred the earth with quiet purpose, and his hands rested near the twin revolvers at his hips, not in threat, but in readiness. The townsfolk parted instinctively, wary but curious. He didn't speak at first, only watched. There was something about him that made people uneasy, a stranger with no past here, yet a calm that cut through the growing tension like a cool breeze. The quiet cowboy was his name, though no one knew much else. He was a man who rode alone, spoke little, and carried a weight in his eyes that matched the town's own. Finally, he stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "I'll take her." A murmur rippled through the crowd like a sudden windstorm. Whispers rose: madness, foolhardy, reckless. The chief's brow furrowed with a mix of hope and doubt. You'll take my daughter?" he asked, voice cracking. The cowboy nodded once. "I know the way. I've seen worse odds before. She deserves that chance." For a moment, no one said a word. Then the chief's shoulders sagged just a bit, relief flickering like a candle flame. "Thank you," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving the stranger's face. The townsfolk shifted uneasily. Mothers pulled their children closer. The men exchanged uncertain glances, but none stepped forward to challenge him. Inside the chief's home, Leela lay wrapped in blankets, her pale fingers trembling slightly as the cowboy entered. He knelt beside her and gently took her hand in his eyes softening beneath the brim of his hat. "We're gonna get you out of here," he said quietly. "You're stronger than they think." And for the first time in weeks, a faint glimmer of hope sparked in Lila's eyes. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the quiet cowboy prepared to ride into the night, carrying a promise heavier than any saddlebag, the promise to save a girl everyone else had given up on. The moon hung low and pale over Dry Creek, casting long shadows that danced in rhythm with the flickering lanterns outside the chief's adobe house. Inside, the quiet cowboy sat by the fire, his worn hat tipped back to reveal eyes that seemed to carry 1,000 miles of dust and sorrow. The townsfolk had long since scattered, leaving only the chief and a few trusted aides to watch over Lila. But the cowboy wasn't thinking about the town or the wary eyes. His thoughts were on the girl, her limp hand still resting in his own, and the journey that awaited them. He knew the path was treacherous, the risks higher than the tallest canyon walls surrounding Dry Creek, yet something deep inside had pushed him forward, beyond the usual code of survival and silence he lived by. He thought back to a time not so long ago, when he was younger and life still held a spark brighter than a campfire. Back then, the cowboy hadn't been so quiet, hadn't been so alone. He'd had a family once, a woman with laughter like spring rain, and a boy who dreamed of running wild beneath the endless sky. But fate, as cruel as a rattlesnake bite, had ripped them from his side. Fire and blood had changed everything. Since then, he rode with a ghost on his shoulder, a quiet promise to keep the memory of those he lost alive in every step, every decision. When he heard about Leela the chief's daughter, he felt that old fire flicker again. She was like a daughter to the town. Fragile but fierce. Trapped not by choice but by cruel chance. And so, despite the danger, despite the whispers of madness from Dry Creek's folk, the cowboy chose to act. He rose from the firelight, his silhouette stark against the glow, and pulled his coat tighter around him. Outside, the night was still, save for the soft rustle of wind through the sagebrush. He moved to the stable, where his horse waited steady and sure as the stars overhead. Before mounting, he looked back at the chief's house, where faint candlelight shimmered through the window. "I won't let her down," he whispered. The journey ahead would test him like nothing before: wild terrain, bitter cold, and the ever-present shadow of danger. But for the first time in a long time, the quiet cowboy felt something that had nothing to do with survival: hope. The first light of dawn stretched thin across the horizon, casting a pale glow over the rugged terrain beyond Dry Creek. The quiet cowboy tightened the saddle straps on his horse, a steady bay with eyes as sharp as its rider's. Nearby, Leela sat propped carefully in a makeshift saddle rigged for her condition, her pale fingers brushing nervously against the worn leather. The town was still waking: no cheers, no farewells, just the soft clink of horseshoes against hard-packed earth as the pair slipped quietly into the morning haze. The road ahead was a narrow ribbon of dust and rock, winding through canyon walls that loomed like silent sentinels. The cowboy knew this trail well. It was merciless, filled with hidden dangers that could snatch life as easily as a rattlesnake's strike. Yet, with every step of the horse, he felt the weight of his promise grow heavier. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a second chance. Lila's voice was barely a whisper at first. "Where are we going?" "To a place where the earth heals and the waters run clear," the cowboy replied, eyes scanning the horizon. "A healer lives beyond the mountain. If there's hope, that's where we'll find it." She nodded, but the fear in her eyes was plain. "I don't know if I can make it," she said, her voice trembling like the soft rustle of dry leaves. The cowboy looked at her, his gaze steady and kind. "You're stronger than you know, Lila. We'll take it one step at a time." The first few miles passed in silence, broken only by the soft breathing of the horse and the distant calls of hawks circling overhead. But the wilderness was never quiet for long. Suddenly, a rustle in the brush caught their attention. The cowboy's hand moved instinctively to his revolver, eyes narrowing. From the shadows stepped a grizzled prospector, his clothes ragged, face sunburnt and wild-eyed. "Lost, are ya?" the man growled, eyeing Lila's fragile form with suspicion. "We're headed to the healer beyond the mountain," the cowboy said calmly, keeping his voice even. The prospector spat on the ground. "Fool's errand. That trail's cursed bandits and worse." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "We've faced worse." The prospector shrugged and disappeared back into the brush, leaving a lingering warning in the air. As the day wore on, the trail grew steeper, the sun hotter. Lila's strength waned, but the cowboy never let her feel it. He adjusted her position carefully, whispering encouragement. "Keep your eyes on the sky," he said. "We're almost through the worst." By evening, they reached a narrow ridge overlooking a valley blanketed in wildflowers and the shimmering silver ribbon of a river, the sign they were close. That night, under a canopy of stars, the cowboy built a small fire. Leela's eyes reflected the dancing flames, and for the first time since the accident, she smiled faintly. "Thank you," she whispered. He tipped his hat low. "No thanks needed. Just hold on." The journey was only beginning, but for both of them, it was a journey toward hope and toward healing. The sun burned fierce and relentless, its rays pounding down on the narrow trail carved through jagged cliffs and tangled sagebrush. The quiet cowboy led their weary horse with steady hands, each step measured and deliberate. Beside him, Lila leaned heavily on the saddle, her breath shallow but steady, the lines of pain etched faintly on her pale face. The journey that began with hope had quickly turned into a test of endurance, not just for Leela's frail body, but for the cowboy's resolve. Out here, the land showed no mercy. Every twist of the trail held the threat of loose rocks or hidden snakes. Every shadow could conceal a predator or worse, men with their own dark designs. As they climbed higher, the wind picked up, whipping dust into swirling clouds that stung their eyes. The cowboy pulled his bandana over his mouth and nose, squinting toward the rocky pass ahead. He could feel it coming. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the canyon. The cowboy froze, eyes sharp as a hawk's. From behind a boulder, two figures stepped out, bandits, faces half covered, guns drawn. Well, one sneered. "Looks like we found ourselves some easy pickings." The cowboy's hand went to his revolver, calm and precise. "This girl's under my protection," he said quietly, voice steady as steel. Walk away now, and no one gets hurt." The bandits laughed, stepping closer, shadows stretching long as the sun dipped low. Leela's breath hitched, fear gripping her like a cold hand. But the cowboy was quicker. In one smooth move, he drew his revolvers, the sharp crack of gunfire ringing through the canyon. Bullets tore through the air, and one bandit went down with a grunt. The second hesitated, then took off running into the rocks. The cowboy didn't chase. Instead, he turned immediately back to Lila. "Are you all right?" he asked, gently brushing dust from her hair. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I am, thanks to you." The danger passed, but the road ahead remained unforgiving. That night, the wind howled like a restless spirit, rattling the canvas of their makeshift shelter. The cowboy sat watch by the fire, eyes scanning the darkness, every sense alert. Leela's breathing was ragged, the strain of the day weighing heavy on her. Yet beneath the exhaustion, there was a spark of fierce will to keep going. "You're tougher than you look," the cowboy said softly, breaking the silence. She smiled faintly. "I'm learning." In the days that followed, the cowboy tended to her with quiet care. He fashioned splints, found wild herbs for pain, and carried her when the trail became too much. Slowly, a bond grew between them, trust forged not in words, but in shared hardship and silent understanding. When a sudden storm swept down the canyon, drenching them to the bone, the cowboy wrapped Leela in his coat, shielding her from the cold. "We'll make it," he promised, voice steady like a mountain. And against all odds, they pressed on to souls bound by hope and grit, riding into the wild heart of a land that tested every ounce of their courage. The air grew cooler as the pair descended from the jagged cliffs, the scent of pine mingling with the earthy musk of damp soil. Below lay the valley the cowboy had promised, a hidden sanctuary wrapped in quiet beauty, where wildflowers carpeted the meadows and a crystal-clear spring gurgled beside a cluster of weathered cabins. This was the place spoken of in hushed legends, a healer's refuge, far from the dusty town and the bitter struggles of Dry Creek. It was said that those who came here found more than just medicine. They found a chance to mend what time and fate had broken. The cowboy guided their horse down the winding path toward the largest cabin, its wooden beams worn smooth by sun and rain. An old woman stood in the doorway, her face lined with years but bright with steady purpose. She was known as Mebel, a healer whose touch was as gentle as the breeze and as sure as the rising sun. Leela's eyes widened with cautious hope as the cowboy helped her down. Mebel stepped forward, kneeling beside the girl with a soft smile. "We'll see what the land can do for you, child," the healer said, her voice warm and steady. For days, the cowboy stayed by Leela's side as Mebel worked her magic herbs brewed into steaming teas, poultices applied with care, and exercises that stretched muscles forgotten by pain. The valley's natural beauty seemed to breathe life into Lila, each passing moment softening the edges of her fear. The cowboy watched quietly, his hands rough but tender as he helped Lila practice standing with support. "You're stronger than you think," he reminded her, echoing his own words from the journey's start. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Leela managed to lift her trembling hand to rest on the cowboy's cheek. For the first time, she smiled freely, a real smile, bright as the morning. "I'm going to walk again," she said, voice firm with newfound determination. Mebel nodded, eyes shining. "With patience and courage, the land will help you heal. But the greatest strength is in your spirit." The cowboy tipped his hat, feeling a quiet pride swell in his chest. This place, the journey, it was more than a rescue. It was a promise fulfilled, a chance for both of them to reclaim something lost. As the days stretched into weeks, the valley became a refuge not just for healing the body, but for rekindling hope. And the cowboy knew the hardest part was still ahead, the return home. But for now, beneath the vast western sky, the promise of a new dawn had never shone brighter. The valley behind them faded like a dream as the quiet cowboy and Lila began their journey back to Dry Creek. The trail was no less harsh, rocky slopes, dry winds, and the ever-watchful eyes of those who didn't want to see her healed. But Leela's steps were stronger now, her spirit fierce beneath the dust and sweat. Word had spread ahead of them like wildfire. The paralyzed chief's daughter was coming home walking, breathing hope where none had been. Not everyone welcomed the news. As they approached the town's dusty main street, a crowd had gathered, faces shadowed by suspicion and fear. The mayor, a stout man with a sharp tongue, stepped forward. "This is a fool's errand," he spat. "She's broken. You're dragging us into trouble, cowboy." The chief stood tall beside Lila, his pride and pain etched into every line of his face. "She's my daughter, and she's coming home." The cowboy dismounted slowly, his eyes steady beneath his hat. "She's stronger than you all gave her credit for. And she's not the only one." Tensions crackled in the dry air like gunpowder. Some townsfolk muttered, others shifted uneasily, but no one dared stop the pair. Suddenly, a younger man stepped forward, a ranch hand, known for his quick temper. "If she can walk, prove it," he challenged, voice loud. Lila took a deep breath, steadying herself. With the cowboy's steady hand guiding, she took a step forward, then another. The crowd gasped, the impossible made real before their eyes. Tears glistened in the chief's eyes. "This is hope," he said softly. The mayor clenched his jaw, but the wind had shifted. The cowboy tipped his hat to Lila and the chief. "She's a fighter, just like this town can be." As the sun set behind the mesas, the town's heart seemed to thaw. For the first time in a long while, Dry Creek dared to believe again. The first light of morning spilled golden over Dry Creek, turning the dusty streets to a warm amber glow. The town stirred to life, but today was different. Hope lingered in the air like a fresh breeze after a long drought. Lila moved slowly but steadily through the square, her steps growing surer with every moment. The townsfolk watched in quiet awe, their faces softened by something long buried beneath fear and doubt. Children who had hidden behind doorways now stepped forward, eyes wide with wonder. The chief stood beside the cowboy near the town's edge, gratitude etched deep into his weathered face. "You kept your word," he said quietly. The cowboy shrugged, tipping his hat as the morning sun caught the brim. "Just did what needed to be done." Lila turned to the cowboy, her smile radiant. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else would." He nodded, a rare softness in his eyes. "You did the hard part." As the town began to buzz with renewed life, the cowboy prepared to leave. The horizon called him, as it always did, a restless spirit riding toward the next promise, the next cause. But before he mounted, Lila spoke once more. "Will you come back?" He paused, then smiled faintly. "Maybe, but for now, this town's got you." With a last look at the place where hope had been reborn, the quiet cowboy swung into the saddle. His silhouette melted into the rising sun, riding off toward whatever future awaited. And Dry Creek, once a town shadowed by fear, faced a new dawn, bright, unbroken, and full of promise.